Spider-Man's new villain is incredible. He's absolutely amazing, and honestly one of the coolest that I think I've seen in quite some time. So this is the Death Spiral storyline. No, we have not covered this for some reason. People keep asking every time we make a video if we've already covered that video, which is weird to me. But the great thing about this is that it does give us the ability to kind of get caught up for those of you guys who are out of the loop in what's been happening with Spider-Man, Venom, Carnage, and these guys. So what this does is this initially picks up with Peter Parker, basically figuring things out after returning. Something that I do want to point out here. We have been covering the whole Hellgate storyline. Peter Parker has returned home. There was an issue when he finally arrived back, but it was really more just him kind of making the rounds and letting everybody know he was there, that kind of stuff. Honestly, you can actually skip that issue and then just jump straight to this one, right? The Venom, Spider-Man, Death Spiral one-shot. But the cool thing about how this is done is that it kind of focuses on the realistic nature of Peter having left Earth for so long, while partially being sent away and then being out in space and forming as Guardians of the Galaxy. He's got past due bills from people, there's notices, there's boatloads of voicemails. And that's one of the things that he talks about here. While I was gone, people tried to take my place as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. And of course, that's when he's met by both Raylith and Glitch. Now, there are a couple members from his own Guardians of the Galaxy team, the ones that were helping him become stronger and more capable, and he also freed them to a degree. But again, that whole Hellgate story is effectively on hold until Death Spiral finishes. But what he says here, weeks of letters from Aunt May, hundreds of voicemails from everyone I know. People joke about having to catch up on life, but that's exactly what I need to do right now, focused, in this moment. And he says, call it ADHD, call it procrastination, good old-fashioned, too scared to deal with reality. I don't really care. Nothing clears my head like a swing through the city, which is true. When I need to clear my head, I actually just drive through the town and drive through mountains. But he says, after an hour and a quick beat down, I am ready. Not in the sense that he got beat down, but like he just beat up a couple of criminals. And that's when he basically starts hitting up everybody that he knows. Now, one of the things that I want to point your attention to is people who were dying. It's kind of a subplot here. It's just the same panel always down at the bottom of the page. Mr. Decividames. These people are basically dying under mysterious circumstances. Ketamine and their system, different things like that. It seems very weird and very random and doesn't really seem to have anything to do with anything, but it will as time goes on. Because as you follow Peter Parker here, he starts making his way through a hospital and ends up coming across Brian Naring, who's actually in the hospital at the moment. Now, this goes back to Amazing Spider-Man, the current run, with issue number 12. One of the things to know is that while Peter Parker had basically been out in space dealing with the whole Hellgate storyline, Norman Osborn was pretending to be Spider-Man, and Ben Reilly was pretending to be Peter Parker. Now, Ben Reilly's story began to kind of fall rank and file with the classic story of Ben Reilly, which is to say, always kind of being angry over the fact that Peter Parker has the life that he feels like he should have. And while it's not as on the nose as the aftermath of the original Miles Warren clone saga in Marvel, it is still kind of falling down those themes. Some people like it, some people are kind of frustrated because it feels like Marvel's retreading the old Ben Reilly storyline over and over and over again. But the fact is, he was basically working at Rand Industries on an agricultural project. Brian was injured during this project, and so while Peter was not operating as part of the project, and it was Ben Reilly pretending to be Peter, it does create a moment of confusion when he's met by someone named Astrid, who worked alongside Ben. And while Peter is familiar with her, at the end of the day, she really just kind of tells him, like, you're on notice with the whole Rand Corporation project and the whole 9 yards. So effectively, it's just kind of like an aftermath of what was going on here. And in fact, she tells him, while the incident is under investigation, officially, you are on administrative leave, but come into the office and let's talk. So again, a lot of this kind of deals with a combination of what Peter was doing, working with Rand alongside Ben Reilly, taking his place. It's small little things like this that just kind of go over the course of the story where Peter is getting caught up. And in fact, that's one of the things he talks about here. Parker, why aren't you calling me back? Why aren't you calling anybody back? In other news, your second cousin, twice removed, passed away. It's funny how terrible news travels fast, but can you give your boy Randy a call? Please, just over and over and over again. Even Miles checks on him. Hey, it's Miles. Are you good? Because you don't look good. These people that are constantly chiming in to see how he's doing because he's not answering anyone. And for the most part, it makes sense. When you have Ben Reilly pretending to be Peter Parker, as far as the world is concerned, Peter's out there. He's just ghosting everybody. And when you have Norman Osborn operating as Spider-Man, the people who know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man feel the same way. So they feel like Peter's just kind of blowing them all off. And that's where Eddie Brock finally leaves a message for Peter and says, hey, I've been trying to get to you, but screw it. Carnage knows. He knows your secret. That is, he knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And he says, it's all good though. Don't worry. I am on top of this. I got it, Pete. I promise. And so that's when you pick up with another instance of a murder. A guy by the name of Gregory Reilly, who dabbled in 3D printing and airbrushing his own artwork. It was a hobby he discovered late in life at 70. 70, and ironically would lead to the accident that took his life less than a year later. So you're starting to notice a pattern here, and in fact, this pattern will become far more prominent as we get further into the story. But at that point, you switch over to Brooklyn, specifically with Eddie Brock and with Carnage. And Eddie says, there's something inside of me, a need. If I don't feed it, I get sick. But when I do, I feel good. I feel incredibly good. Eventually, it'll probably kill me. But until then, I can use it. I can use it to help. I have got it under control. And that's where Carnage says, we control each other, Eddie. We are Carnage. Now, here's the thing to know here. In the aftermath of the whole Meridius storyline, King in Black and Eddie Brock becoming God and all that kind of cool stuff, that once that was all said and done, Eddie Brock lost Venom, and instead he got Carnage. Now, that actually led to the Eddie Brock Carnage comic line. We did not cover it. People were telling me it was fantastic, and I feel like we should. Let me know if you guys want me to. It's a pretty solid story, but the long and short of the relationship between Eddie and Carnage in the here and now is that while Carnage is just a mass-murdering symbiote, as most all of you guys know, Eddie Brock is still essentially a good guy at heart. And so the deal that was struck between the two of them when Carnage bought it to Eddie, because essentially they were both dying, was that Eddie would be the one to be in control. And the only time they would take people out is when they were criminals, when they just kind of determined the world would be better off without that person. Now, these are not guys who are like jaywalking or anything like that. It's just this really interesting philosophy about the morality of murdering murderers is really all it comes down to. But that's why Carnage starts talking to Eddie and says, why are you killing vermin? It's beneath us. Lesser beings do not give us the hit that we need. You're only delaying the inevitable, Eddie. Besides, we are in New York City, the concrete jungle, a killer on every corner. For us, it's a banquet. I did miss it so. And he says, the need grows inside us. No matter how many cockroaches and rats and pigeons you skewer, and yet we sit on this filthy roof when we could be engaged in glorious, morally justified murder of human monsters. What is it, Eddie? What's the holdup? And that's when he says, oh, it's Spider-Man, isn't it? Or should I say Peter Parker? And he says, well, don't fret, Mr. Brock. I'm glad that you warned him that I know his true identity. I'm having the most delightful time imagining what he's going through. Pure terror. I want him to stew in it. I wouldn't go anywhere near him, even if I could, which I can't, as you well know. All my power is yours. You're the boss, Eddie Brock. And that's where Eddie says, that's right, Carnage, I am. So you're hopefully noticing some manipulation here from Carnage. Oh, you're the one running the show, Eddie. You're the boss. I just do whatever you tell me to. You're the one who's really running the show. No. That's not the case at all. And we'll actually see that as we get further through this, because it gets really, really cool. And so at that point, Carnage just says, yeah, this is the stuff. Nothing like a city, especially this city. Did you know over 200 people die in New York every single day? You can almost feel it like this. Energy. And where Carnage continues on, of course, Eddie Brock cuts him off and just kind of tells him to shut up. And he says, straight to business. I can appreciate that. Let's go find Torment. Now, Torment is an ongoing storyline that essentially started in the Carnage comic, which is why I say it's probably worth going through and focusing on that comic, because it introduces the FBI agent Bailey Bushkin, the attempt to find Torment. And we'll learn a little more about that as we get through this. But again, the fact is, this has been a thread that Eddie and Carnage have been chasing for a little while. It's just now catching up with everything going on in the Death Spiral storyline. And so that's where Carnage says, Torment is a good choice for us. According to Bailey Bushkin's files, he's a chain killer. Goes after people connected by some logic only he understands. And so that's where Eddie says killing him could save a lot of people. And Carnage says, I guess, if you care about that kind of thing. And so we ask, is Torment here? I'm not sensing any killers, but New York can be tough. Lots of background murderousness. Throws off my radar. Which I kind of like the idea that Carnage has like a murderous radar. Like, people who are more murderous show up as bigger dots than people who have like just killed one guy, that kind of thing. But that's the person behind the scenes who's killing all these various people. This kind of pattern that's going on. Torment is the one taking them out. But again, there's a colonel named Reilly who's killed. So the pattern continues. It's effectively the last names of all the people who were associated with Ben Reilly, Eddie Brock, and seemingly Peter Parker. It's very Terminator-esque in that way. For those of you guys who remember the first film, that Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, was just killing everyone in the phone book named Sarah Connor because it was just the most effective way to do it as far as the Terminator was concerned. But as Eddie and Carnage are making their way through here, Eddie just kind of says, I look like garbage, which he does. He looks very, very rough. This man has absolutely seen better days over the course of his life. But Carnage just kind of comments, it doesn't matter, you'll be wearing the most stylish outfit in town when you cut this guy apart. By which I mean me. But if you want to spruce it up, be my guest. Like I said, you control our powers, Eddie. And because Carnage is capable of shape-shifting, Eddie ends up putting on a sport jacket with a pair of jeans. But we end up finding out he's not actually tracking down Torment in the here and now. He's actually going to find Dylan. Now, the relationship between Dylan and Eddie is still every bit as tenuous as it was back during the initial Meridius storyline, which is to say, when Donny Cates's run on Venom ended, the whole King in Black story concluded Null the symbiote god was defeated and Eddie Brock took the place of Null. If you guys remember, he ended up basically going into space and kind of becoming a part of the symbiote hive mind and essentially left Dylan Brock on Earth. Now, he left the Venom symbiote with Dylan Brock, and the Venom symbiote's job was to protect Dylan, but the biggest issue about this when it came to Dylan is he felt abandoned by his father, and so that created a very difficult relationship between the two. To say nothing of the fact that while you were getting dual stories from both Ram V and Al Ewing during that Venom run, I believe it was Al Ewing, during that whole Venom run, that one story focused on Dylan trying to flee the government, the anti-symbiote task force, who was looking to capture him and the Venom symbiote and use it for their own ends. And then the other half of the story focused on Eddie. But that whole strained relationship never fully recovered between the two. And so that's why when Dylan answers the door, he asks, "What the hell are you doing here?" And that's where Eddie just says, "Hey Dylan, this is maybe an unpleasant surprise." And Dylan just punches him in the face and just says, "That was an unpleasant surprise. Get the hell out of here, Dad." And Eddie just says, "Dylan, come on, I just want to talk." And that's when Paul shows up. Now, Paul is basically the caretaker of Dylan in the here and now. But something to know about Paul, everyone hates this guy. And when I say everyone, I mean like everyone who reads Marvel Comics. He was dating Mary Jane Watson for a little while. When Marvel killed that relationship, it was like Emperor Palpatine dying at the end of Return of the Jedi. And everyone in every city across the country was just dancing and celebrating. No one liked Paul. Marvel didn't even like Paul. Like, it was absolutely bonkers. But the fact is, Paul is basically crashing in Mary Jane Watson's place at the moment, and so is Dylan, because he just kind of needs a place to live. But the reality here, and the biggest reason why Eddie is here, is not necessarily to bring Dylan back into his life. It should be. But given everything that Eddie has going on, it's honestly not the best environment for Dylan. And so Dylan asks, "Why do you look like a professional wrestler at their divorce hearing?" And Eddie just tells him, "I am going through some challenges, and I could really use some help." And so Dylan almost sees this as like an olive branch. Okay, so you finally need me? So again, seeking the approval of his father, like, you need me for something. Okay, I'm here if you need me. What do you need me for? That's why he just says, "I guess I can help you out if I can." And Eddie says, No. I would never involve you in what I have going on. I'm looking for Venom. I know he's been seen around the city. I thought maybe you might know where he is." And that pisses Dylan off, because the one thing he wanted was to feel needed by his father. But again, Eddie has kept him at arm's length the entire time, and that's why he gets angry. "So you didn't come to see me. You came to see it. I should have known." And he says, "Well, sorry to disappoint, Eddie. Venom's not here." These days, he's all up in Mary Jane Watson and just kind of dismisses him. And so at that point, you jump to Mary Jane Watson and to Flash Thompson. Now, this is not a great, big, huge sequence of events here. This is really just kind of a catch-up for what's going on. Flash Thompson still very much operates as anti-Venom within Marvel Comics. But Mary Jane Watson having the Venom symbiote, and the two of them having to be bonded in order to survive, is something that she's still coming to terms with. Now, initially, there was a little pushback on the idea of MJ being Venom. But I think over the course of the Venom run, as it's been handled so far, a lot of people have grown receptive to it. Honestly, it's kind of grown on me. And I've really learned to love the idea of Mary Jane Watson being Venom. It just kind of changes the dynamic of the entire Venom comic when you consider that Mary Jane Watson is kind of the host inside the symbiote. And so Flash asks her the question, "Who all knows that you are Venom?" And that's where she's like, "Well, I mean, Madam Mask, the only bad guy, unless she talks. Then, of course, everybody's going to know." She hasn't really tried anything since we beat the tar out of her last month. But then she continues on. Obviously, Paul knows, Dylan knows, Robbie Robertson, and of course, Spider-Man knows. Now, Peter Parker figured this out, or at least was told by Mary Jane Watson when he returned after everything that was going on with Hellgate. He wasn't really a big fan of it. He was kind of pissed off by it all. And in fact, he told Mary Jane Watson, "You deserve this. The two of you deserve to be together." What Peter didn't know was the other side of the equation, that they bonded because they had to, not necessarily because they wanted to. So it wasn't really a choice between per se. Marvel also does kind of tease the idea of a romance between Flash Thompson and Mary Jane Watson, which actually seems pretty cool. And I'm curious to see how you guys feel about this. Could you guys see Flash Thompson and Mary Jane Watson being a couple? Now, they don't necessarily solidify it. It's really just kind of Mary Jane Watson. Like, what do you consider us to be? And Flash Thompson's like, "I don't know. I mean, we're obviously friends, but maybe there's something there." And MJ is a little non-committal herself. It's kind of like, I mean, I'm not against maybe, And so it's like, yeah, let's just kind of stay in this maybe box, this kind of non-committal standing of where we're at. Flash Thompson does make it clear he would like for it to be something serious. But if them being serious would potentially lead to the end of their friendship, he doesn't want to become serious at all. He values their friendship more than he values values them being in a relationship. So again, it's one of these things where Marvel's kind of teasing it, toying with it, and we may or may not see it becoming something at some point in the future. But in the midst of all this, Paul ends up calling MJ up and letting her know that basically Eddie Brock had shown up there, that Eddie Brock was looking for Venom, and that he said something to Dylan, and that Dylan's just kind of sitting in his room and is really just sulking essentially, but also struggling with depression, to be honest, feeling rejection yet again at the hands of his father. And so what ends up happening, of course, is that MJ turns into Venom and then basically swings away. But again, like I told you guys, there's a lot more going on to the relationship between Carnage and Eddie Brock than we were initially told. Because what ends up happening is that while Eddie Brock is sleeping and kind of coaxed into sleeping by Carnage, you should lay down and get some rest. You know, that kind of thing. Then, of course, Carnage ends up using the Face ID of Eddie to unlock his phone and then text Torment on what is essentially a disposable chat program. And he says, Torment, then Torment responds, Mr. Redman, always a pleasure. And Carnage just says, I'm sure I've got another name for your spiral locks right in with Eddie Brock and Peter Parker. They're all tied together. One big, unhappy family, 3 spirals that make one ugly, twisted knot. You will have a blast. And Torment just says, I'll have to start a new cord. Move fast with it to catch up with the others. But I'm listening. What's the name? And that's when Carnage tells him, Mary Jane Watson. And so what you end up getting is this kind of background image where what Torment is doing is starting with essentially the outermost members of Peter Parker, Eddie Brock, Ben Reilly, their families, and circling in directly to those guys themselves, eventually seemingly going after Peter Parker directly. That's where the whole death spiral name comes from. It's a dance, starting from the outside and working your way in. Now, it's important to know that there are a few things going on here. The first is that no one knows this pattern. Peter hasn't even had a reason to look into it yet. Neither has Venom. While Carnage is chasing it down, Eddie Brock doesn't really know what Carnage is doing, so he doesn't know the nature of this pattern. But what's more important than any of that, Peter Parker and Venom do not know that Eddie Brock is the host for Carnage. They're not aware of this. But one of the other cool things that goes on here is that Eddie Brock is no dum-dum. Most of you guys know that. I mean, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but the guy is by no standard of measurement an idiot, and he's able to put things together. Now, that was a legitimate fear that a lot of people had when it came to Eddie Brock becoming Carnage, that if you look on Reddit or Twitter or any number of these platforms, a lot of people were worried that Marvel was going to send Eddie Brock back to being the guy who was just kind of like this muscle-bound, moron, essentially, and didn't really have a shred of meaningful intelligence about him, and just kind of disregard all the character development that had happened over the course of The King in Black, Donny Cates, Al Ewing runs on Venom. Instead, Marvel kind of embraces that to a degree, albeit within the context of the story. And again, we'll kind of see that here in a second, because one of the things that Eddie Brock asked is he asked Carnage, do you know where my phone is? And Carnage just says, well, you mean the only item that you own that is never out of reach? And Eddie just kind of like, I'm a little distracted. And so Carnage says, you're a mess, Eddie. We should grab a bite. Isn't the Bronx a crime-ridden murderer's paradise? And Eddie just says, that's Staten Island. Now shut up and look for clues. The lady who worked here wound up inside of a python, but there was a spiral mark. And that's kind of a little tagline that gets left behind every single murder that happens. From Torment has a spiral left behind. Basically, its calling card. It's not that dissimilar from basically the Maximum Carnage storyline when Carnage would write Carnage rules or that kind of thing to kind of sign his work. So people know that he was the one committing the crime. And that's where Carnage asked, did Torment really feed this woman to her snake? Outstanding. Carnage is really, really twisted. This guy's pretty messed up. But Eddie just says, if we can crack why he chooses his victims, because it's the one thing they're trying to figure out. And that's where Carnage just says, look at you, applying logic to the illogical musings of a madman as if they belong to one happy Manson family. And so Eddie's just kind of like, why do you say family like that? And Carnage is like, I don't know, man. Dramatic effect. But again, Eddie starts to put these clues together. That's one of the cool things about Eddie Brock. And again, that's why that history remains intact. The fact that he's been associated with symbiotes for so long and understand how they evolve and grow and the human mannerisms that they pick up. He starts to realize Carnage knows something that he's not letting on. And so that's why Carnage says, I know that if we don't kill something soon, we are going to pass out. And when you pass out, you really pass out. And so Eddie asks, did you steal my phone? And so Carnage kind of gives him an indirect clue when he literally just sends out a couple of little talon spike things and kills a couple of butterflies. He's not supposed to be able to move unnoticed unless Eddie allows him to move. He has to do whatever Eddie tells him to do. The fact that he was able to do that independently is effectively Carnage demonstrating to Eddie he can act without his authority, that he does still have his own agency. And so that's when Eddie says, how did you do that? You can't move unless I let you move. Carnage tells him, totally. Them's the rules. And I am a model rule follower. But your cold turkey non-killing program leaves you pretty shaky, partner. We better find the big bad killer man soon, or who knows what might happen. Chop, chop, Mr. Brock. And so that's when you switch over to Shocker. Now, the cool thing about Shocker is that I wouldn't go so far as to say that he is on a path of redemption. redemption. Not really. He's as much of a criminal as he ever was. But he found some stable of a criminal life. And that's kind of how it works in the underground when it comes to Spider-Man comics and really the criminal lifestyle. In the same way that, like, you know, actors and voice actors in Hollywood, they're all trying to work for SAG-AFTRA because of all the benefits that it comes with, and it's stable employment and it's a union job and that kind of thing. When it comes to the criminal underworld in New York within the Spider-Man comics, and ostensibly the rest of the criminal underground from any other villains who exist out there, finding gainful employment with a major crime boss is what you're always hoping for. It creates stability, steady work, and that if somebody were to come after you, you've got the backing of a major crime boss. So it's kind of like the mob equivalent of being a made man. Somebody whacks a made man, that made man's gonna die. You basically end up like Nicky at the end of Casino. Yeah, for those of you guys who understand that reference. But when Shocker gets back, when Herman arrives back at home, he's immediately attacked by Torment. And Torment just says, son of Mary Ann Sinek and Henrik Schultz, no sibling. But Mom had a sister. Did you know that? Married a Caro, and their daughter married a Watson. Isn't that lucky? And Herman asks, who in the hell are you? And Torment just cuts his forearm clean off and says, you may not realize this, but you are very loud, and kills Shocker on the spot. And so that's when you focus on the biggest concern that Peter Parker has. He actually sits down and has a conversation with Mary Jane Watson. Truth to tell, this conversation was a long time coming. It was necessary for the two of them to come to terms on everything that had happened. The fact that he had metaphorically slammed the door in Mary Jane Watson's face and said, you know what, you deserve this. To be bonded to Venom, like all that kind of stuff, this is them basically coming to terms. And it's more or less an apology, where he kind of explains everything that had happened during the Hellgate storyline, that he was literally sent into space, that Ben Reilly took his place as Peter Parker, Norman Osborn took his place as Spider-Man. And he says, almost everyone I know thinks I ghosted them or went insane. But yeah, that's not the headline. You died, and basically, Venom saved your life. And now the two of you are bonded together. And in fact, she tells Peter, the reason why I didn't initially tell you that I was Venom when you first got back here was because I thought that you would make it about you, that we somehow chose this. But that's where MJ just says, we did not need you to save us. We saved ourselves, but we did want time to process what we were going through ourselves, alone, just like you've done since I've known you. And so it was kind of one of these funny things, because she sort of paints this picture that Peter Parker follows this philosophy that is rules for thee, not for me. I process things on my own. I process things in a way that works for me. You are not allowed to do that. You have to come to me, MJ, and talk to me about whatever you're struggling with. You need to be open with me, but I don't necessarily have to do that for you. No. Friendship doesn't work that way. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's like Kevin Hart said, when you sign up to be best friends, your problems become their problems, and their problems become your problems. You struggle together, you celebrate together. And honestly, that's what makes friendships great, and that's what deepens the connection between friendships. And that's where Peter kind of starts spilling the beans on everything he's been struggling with, specifically the fact that Carnage knows who he is, because that's what he tells MJ, where she says, you're not alone, Peter. Getting back to life, or mending fences, or whatever you're going through, we are part of it now. We are a part of this journey that you're on. We will help you however we can. Peter tells her, you have no idea how true that is. When I was gone, Eddie Brock tried to contact me, and he left me a message. And that's where MJ is like, why did a chill just run down my spine? And Peter says, I don't even want to say it out loud. But Venom asks him, what's this message? And Peter says, Carnage knows. He knows that I am Spider-Man, and he's going to come for me. So no one I know is safe. No one at all. Because while Carnage has not played a major role in Spider-Man's life for quite some time, Peter knows enough about Carnage to know when he arrives on the scene and when there's like the murder of the Shocker. And it writes, Carnage ruled on the wall, which that past tense is going to be important. When Carnage shows back up, people are going to die. And when Carnage comes after Spider-Man, the people Spider-Man cares about are going to die. And there's no getting past that. And so what you end up doing is picking up with Eddie Brock and Carnage when they're reading the Daily Bugle article about the death of the Shocker, and notice how it reads. Carnage in New York. Killer symbiote returns. Cops urge caution. And so that's when Eddie reads it. Carnage rules. Is there something you're not telling me? And Carnage just says, I'm not sure, Eddie. Let me take a better look. And then pops out of Eddie Brock's eye in a pretty grotesque way. That's also hilarious at the same time. And he just says, relax, I'll put it back in. But once he starts looking at the article, he says, no, that says Carnage ruled past tense once a ruler, but no longer Torment is calling us out, Eddie. He's saying that we are not killing enough. And where Eddie's dismissive of it, Carnage tells him, we've been so slow, so finicky, only killing serial killers. You cannot say that I have not been patient, Eddie. You cannot say that I have not tried to see things your way. And so where Eddie asked the question, why did Torment kill the Shocker? How is he connected? What's Torment's pattern? Carnage just says, I wish I knew, Eddie. I bet it's something really intricate and fascinating. Something really, really cool. Because Carnage does know. I mean, Carnage is perfectly aware of this. He's the one setting Torment down down the path. He's giving him everything he needs to go after the various people within the life of Spider-Man, Eddie, and Ben Reilly. And so again, that's where Marvel feeds on this idea that Eddie's every bit as capable as he ever was. He says, because every killer we take out is an audition reel to you. If they can finish me, they're worthy of you. That's your motivation here. So tell me, Carnage, how big of a coincidence is it that this creep puts your slogan on his kill while we are in New York hunting him? From Eddie's perspective, it's Torment advertising to Carnage. It's Torment basically telling Carnage, hey, I would be a fantastic host for you. I would be a better host than Eddie Brock. I'll kill him and demonstrate that to you. And it's seemingly Carnage observing all of this and kind of responding to Torment and saying, okay, let's see how sadistic of a killer you can possibly be. How many bodies are you willing to rack up? Are you able to live up to my legacy? That's really what it seems to be. Almost like Torment is being treated as the heir apparent to the Carnage symbiote. It's really cool, the relationship between these guys. And so where Carnage responds and says, Eddie, if only I knew. Eddie kind of fires back, why don't you? How come he knows about us and you don't know about him? I am sick of your games, Carnage. It's bad enough that you know who Spider-Man is, and I swear if I find out that you're planning something else. And so Carnage is kind of dismissive. He says, I would never keep secrets, Eddie. I've been very forthcoming with everything that I know. You're the boss. But isn't it a little hypocritical to accuse me of wanting to stray? After all, there's a certain symbiote in New York that you would love nothing more than to slip back into. And so that's where Peter and Venom basically show up to the bar with no name. It's a criminal bar within the city of New York. Now, in this instance, it's more or less being ran by Tombstone. And there is a little bit of back and forth between Peter and Boomerang in the sense that when Peter shows up here, this is all these criminals basically mourning the death of the Shocker. And there's kind of an unwritten rule when it comes to the criminals within the city of New York, specifically in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, that Spider-Man doesn't kill the criminals, but Spider-Man will also work to make sure no one kills criminals, believing they can be redeemed. And so it's almost kind of viewed as one part of failing of Spider-Man, but on the other part, disrespectful to the memory of the Shocker that Spider-Man would even show up here in the first place. But one of the things that Spider-Man tells Boomerang here is that, look, I'm not here to disrespect the memory of Shocker. And honestly, I always kind of liked him. The guy was not sadistic. He wasn't a crazy serial killer. He wasn't beyond being redeemed. The guy just like robbed some stuff. At the end of the day, I always kind of felt like he could turn his life around, and now he can't because he's dead. So Peter takes it very, very personally and is taking it hard. So it's showing that he's mourning alongside everybody else, despite the fact that he is a hero. And so what ends up happening is that Peter and Venom are called into the office of Tombstone. And so when the three of them start talking, Tombstone breaks out the newspaper and is like, yeah, so Carnage is back in New York and he's one of yours. And Peter just says, I mean, not technically. And Venom's like, yeah, literally, he's my offspring. And so Tombstone is like, so then how do we kill it? And Spider-Man's like, look, I mean, I don't necessarily know if I like the K word. And Venom's like, so here's how you do it. He's like, so fire's useful, but we can learn to tolerate it. Starving us of a host will work on most of us, but it takes a long time. Your best option is sonic. Direct sound waves, high frequency, high decibel. That'll finish any symbiote if you hit us hard enough. Maybe the host too. Yeah. So he literally just gives Tombstone the information he needs on how to kill a symbiote. And so where Spider-Man continues to kind of talk about this idea of not really liking killing folks, Tombstone's like, look, man, this is a grown-up conversation and this is a grown-up table. If you're going to function like a little kid and you're going to refuse to act in the real world the way the real world is, I'll rule out a ball pit for you. Now, again, that's pretty cold. And honestly, one of the most important aspects of Spider-Man is the fact that he doesn't like to kill criminals because they can be redeemed in some capacity, or at the very least have the opportunity to turn themselves around. Hope springs eternal in the world of Spider-Man comics. But again, that's where Tombstone puts them onto something incredibly important, as he says that explains what he stole. And initially, they don't know what he's talking about. And Tombstone says the cops kept it out of the papers, but not from me. Your guy stole the Shocker's vibro gauntlets. So based on what you just told me, the next target is you. He's going to be coming after you guys. Now, at that point, you switch over to Eddie Brock, and they literally start going through and chasing down this whole sequence from Bailey Bushkin. The fact that, as far as they know, Torment was tied to something like 70 murders, but there's even more that are unsolved. And so what ends up happening is Eddie discovers that there's a bus that was blown up, but half the people on it had the same name, which was the name of the bus company, Brock. He says, and they were all going to the funeral of another Brock. And that's where he says, let me look something up. And then he starts to see members of his own family, Uncle Mike, Aunt Maxine. And he's like, there's no way that can be right, that his dad is seemingly on the list. And he says he kills families. That's the connection. He picks his victims and then he kills his way to them, starts with the most distant relative and works his way in. And then he gets mad at Carnage about the fact that Carnage knew the entire time and kept that information secret. Now, from Peter Parker and Venom's perspective, Carnage is the guy who stole the vibro gauntlets. So now they're looking to track Carnage down, which, funny enough, he just comes swinging out in front of them. And so they're just like, there he is. So they immediately go after him. Now, technically, it's Venom who goes after Carnage. Peter's a lot more reserved. He's like, do not go after him alone. We have to prepare. Carnage has historically always gotten the upper hand on both of us. The last time we faced off against him, we almost didn't win during the Maximum Carnage storyline. And so where Venom does start to get the upper hand on Carnage due to magical enchantments, the anti-Carnage aspects of his suit. He says, "You heard Eddie was in town, and you figured you would get the drop on him. Revenge at last. Only you thought he was bonded to me, and you're so pathetic right now that you needed an edge. That's why you stole the Shocker's tech. You're not nearly as powerful as you used to be because, lest we forget, the last time that Venom and Carnage met each other, Carnage had basically gone on this warpath and attained powers of godhood so he could kill Meridius and take his place as the King in Black. Now again, all that went belly up. Carnage lost a massive amount of his power, pretty much all of it, and in that weakened state, he had to bond to Eddie Brock in order to survive. But that's where Spider-Man arrives on the scene. And Spider-Man tells Venom, "I've been tracking the gauntlets, and they're half a mile away. They're not here. Carnage does not have them. Someone framed Carnage and made it look like he's the one that stole the Shocker's gauntlets." And so Venom asks, like, "That's insane. Why would anyone do that?" And Carnage just says, "Because Carnage did not come here to kill Eddie Brock. He came with Eddie Brock because we are Carnage." And in that moment, since Spider-Man flying, and in that distraction, when Venom goes running to Spider-Man because Mary Jane Watson is the one in the Venom suit, Carnage makes his escape. And so finally, he ends up busting into the apartment of where his dad's supposed to be, because it's the one person that he wants to keep safe, which is strange given the historically abusive nature between Eddie Brock and the father of Eddie Brock. Eddie Brock's father was a terrible person to Eddie and was somewhat of a terrible person to Dylan. And so that's why when Eddie busts into this place, he ends up seeing Torment waiting on him with the dead body of his father. And Torment just says, "It's good to see you, Eddie. After all this time, it's kind of perfect." So seemingly Torment's hinting at the idea that he knows who Eddie Brock is, and they have a history together. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.